The wind in the Karengal doesn't move like normal wind. It doesn't push. It argues. It changes its mind 3 times before your bullet gets where you sent it. We've been up on that ridge for 11 hours before anyone said what we were all thinking, that the man we were sent to kill was going to walk away clean. My name and my opinion is Sergeant First Class Daniel Reyes, 75th Ranger Regiment, and I want to tell you something before this story starts. I've never been the kind of soldier who writes things down, but some things happen to you and they don't leave. They set up camp behind your eyes, and they're there every morning when you wake up, and eventually you figure out you've got 2 choices. You write it down, or it writes you. So I'm writing it down. It began the way most bad weeks begin in the Army, with good intelligence. Target is a ghost, Lieutenant Ferraro told us during the briefing at FOB Blessing. He tapped the satellite image on the table. Pretty much a compound. 3 walls standing, 1 collapsed. Poppy fields to the east, a dry creek bed to the west. Abu Hamdan, facilitator. IED network, basically running from Pakistan to 4 different provinces. This man's fingerprints are on 63 coalition casualties in the last 18 months. He let that number breathe. 63. He moves. He's smart. He doesn't use phones. Plus, he doesn't meet in the same place twice. But we've had a source confirm. He will be at this compound for a prayer gathering. Window is 6 hours. We insert tonight. The room was quiet in that specific military way. Not the quiet of men who were scared, but the quiet of men who were calculating. You could hear boots shifting on the plywood floor. Someone's gear clinked, which I looked across the table at Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb. Our team's primary sniper, 3 deployments, 2 combat patches, the kind of calm that made you feel better just standing next to him. He was studying the terrain map the way a carpenter studies wood grain. Reading it, elevation on the ridge, he asked. 2,000 meters above the target compound. Webb nodded slowly. Didn't say anything to be fair else, which I should have read that nod better. There was something in it. Not hesitation exactly, but awareness. The kind, of awareness that comes from knowing what the wind in the Karengal does to a bullet at range. We inserted at 0130. For to be fair, kilometers on foot through a terrain that seemed personally offended by our presence. Loose shale that rolled under your boots like it was trying to throw you, thorn brush. That found every gap in your kit, the coal that came down off the Hindu Kush so dry, and hard it made your sinuses bleed. I'd Sergeant actually First Class Tony Okafor on my left, Private First Class Rodriguez behind me, and Webb up front moving like smoke. Nobody talked. We didn't need to. The stars above the Karengal are obscene. I mean that as a compliment and a complaint simultaneously. Out there, away from every generator and FOB light, the Milky Way comes down so thick, and why do you feel like you're walking uphill toward it? Sort of beautiful and disorienting. Plus, Rodrigo told me once, first deployment, that the stars made him homesick. I understood that exactly. They were the same stars as home, and they were in absolutely the wrong place. We reached the overwatch position at 0342. Webb, when I think, to work immediately, setting up the .338 Lapua on its bipod, getting into position, regulating his breathing. I established comms with the TOC back at Blessing, confirmed the source's information was still holding. Target was expected to arrive at the compound between 0600 and 0800 for FAR, the dawn prayer. We waited. The Karengal woke up the way it always does, reluctantly in stages. First the darkness goes from black to dark blue. Then a thin line of something almost orange appears behind the eastern peaks, and the entire valley starts to separate itself from shadow. For about 6 minutes, it's the most beautiful place on Earth before it remembers it's trying to kill you. At 0613, the source called it in, which movement at the compound. I watched through to be fair, my spotting scope. 3 men entered through the eastern gap of the wall. Then 2 more. Plus, a vehicle, old Land Cruiser, dusty white, pulled off the road, and a man got out with deliberate, unhurried steps. The walk of someone who'd been careful for so long they'd stopped being afraid. "I've got him," Webb said quietly. The profile matched. The gate matched. Everything matched. TOC confirms, I guess I told him, and green light. Webb fired. The shot went wide. Not dramatically wide. Subtle wide. The kind of miss that makes a sniper's jaw tighten because he knows immediately what happened. The bullet impacted 4 feet left of the target, center mass of the compound's rear wall. Abu Hamdan didn't even flinch. Well, he walked inside. Wind shifted, Webb said. Flat. Plus informationnel. He's still in the compound. Okafor said from his position. We weighed him sort of out. We waited 40 minutes. Abu Hamdan emerged again, which spoke to 2 men in the courtyard. Stood still for 11 seconds. 11 clean, unmoving seconds. Webb fired again, which again wide. This time right. The wind had swung back. I reported to TOC. They told us to hold position. Target wasn't moving. Take our time. No panic in the voice, but I could hear the calculation underneath it. How long can you hold a man's attention before he senses something? Webb fired again, which and again. By shot 7, something had changed in Webb's breathing. I could hear it. The control was still there. The technique was perfect, but there was a layer underneath now. A friction, and the kind that comes from knowing you've done everything right, and the world has decided not to cooperate. By shot 10, Abu Hamdan had moved inside, and the window was tightening. By shot 13, God help us, 2 of the men in the compound were starting to scan the ridge lines. Not with precision, not like they'd located us, but with the animal instinct of men who'd been in proximity to violence long enough to smell it. He's actually good a rabbit, Okafor said. Plus, Webb said nothing. He was still behind the scope, still controlling his breathing, but his hands were, I don't know how to describe it. Still. Too still. Like a man holding himself together by sheer will. TOC, this is Reyes, I said into the radio. We've had 13 attempts, no effect. Target is still mobile, but compound security is getting hinky. We need options. There was a pause on the other end. Longer, I think, than a normal pause. And then a voice I didn't recognize, calm, female, slightly clipped, came back on the net. Reyes, this is Sierra 9 actual. I'm 200 meters east of your position on the reverse slope. Been watching your rounds. I think I know what's happening. Request permission to take the shot. I looked at Okafor. Basically, he looked at me. TOC, I said carefully, who's Sierra 9 actual? Another pause. Sergeant Reyes, Sierra 9 actual, is clear hot. Plus, that's all you need. Do you copy? Webb slowly, without a word, moved back from the rifle. Not in defeat. Something more complicated than defeat. He rolled onto his back and stared at the sky and said very quietly, I can't read this wind. It's layered. 3 different currents at different altitudes. Been fighting it for 4 hours. And then footsteps, careful, deliberate, on the shale behind us. She didn't announce herself. Didn't explain. Just moved into position, examined Webb's setup for exactly 4 seconds. Then began making adjustments I didn't have the technical vocabulary to fully understand. Honestly, she was slight. That's the first thing I noticed. Not small, slight, like everything unnecessary had been removed. Dark hair pulled back severe. Sort of plus, no rank visible. Her sort of rifle wasn't standard issue. It was something I'd never seen outside of a classified equipment briefing, long and pale and wrong-looking like it had been made by someone who didn't care what it looked like as long as it worked. What's your solution? I asked her. She didn't look up. Don't have one yet. She pressed her eye to the scope and went completely, absolutely still. Her name, I found out later, was Warrant Officer Elena Vasquez. But that's later. In the moment, she was just a stranger behind an unfamiliar rifle. And my job was to watch a compound 4 kilometers away, while Abu Hamdan decided whether today was the day he disappeared permanently into Pakistan. I want to tell you what the next 40 minutes looked like from my spotting scope, because I was the one tracking the target, and what I saw changed the way I understood precision, not just in shooting, but in everything. She didn't fire, not for a long time. Plus, Webb had been fighting the wind, which I understand now was the right instinct applied to the wrong problem. The wind was, I guess, layered, meaning there were 3 distinct air columns moving at different speeds, and directions between the muzzle and the target. Most snipers train for surface wind. Some train for mid-range correction. Almost nobody trains for triple-layer correction at 4,000 meters, because almost nobody is asked to shoot at 4,000 meters. That distance, by the way, I want you to understand what 4,000 meters means. It means your bullet is in the air for over 4 seconds. It means the Earth's rotation matters. It, I think, means the temperature difference between the barrel and the air outside affects trajectory. It means you're not shooting at a man. You are shooting at a mathematical prediction of where a man will be when physics finishes doing what physics does. Vasquez was lying behind that rifle doing math in her head that most people need a computer for. I know this because I asked her about it later in a concrete room at a firebase whose name I can't use. She told me she had a notebook, actually a small, spiral-bound thing she kept in her left chest pocket, the cover worn soft from use. She'd been on this ridge since 2200 the night before, which means she'd arrived 5 hours before us without our knowing. She'd spent those 5 hours doing nothing but reading the wind at every observable altitude, charting it, looking for patterns. It pulses, she told me. The layering. Every 11 to 14 minutes, there's a window where the 3 currents briefly align. Doesn't last long. Maybe 4 seconds. 4 seconds. When she arrived at our position that morning, she'd already mapped 3 of those windows. She was waiting for the 4th. While she waited, Webb and I stayed in position and I watched the compound. Abu Hamdan came out again at 0809. He stood in the courtyard with a younger man, mid-20s, heavy set, and they talked. The conversation looked unhurried. He gestured twice toward the east. Plus, the younger man nodded. He's giving instructions. I told Vasquez, which I know, she said. Windows closing. He's going to get back in that vehicle. I know that too. Webb was sitting against a rock 3 meters back, knees up, head down, hands loose in his lap. He wasn't sulking. Webb was never that kind of man. But he was somewhere inside himself, doing whatever soldiers do when they've given everything they have, and it wasn't enough, and now they have to watch someone else finish it. I understood that feeling. I'd lived inside it before, on a night in Ramadi that I don't write about. Can I ask you something? I said to Vasquez, keeping my voice low, eyes on the scope. You can ask. You've been on this ridge since last night. You watched 13 shots go wide. Why didn't you say something earlier? A long pause. Not uncomfortable. Then, you wouldn't have needed me, and this conversation wouldn't be happening. She said it without ego. Pure logistics. At 0831, Vasquez said, very quietly, 2 minutes. I don't know how she knew. I couldn't feel what she was feeling in the air. But something in the way she said it made my whole body go alert. The particular quiet of her voice, like someone stepping onto ice and finding it solid. Abu Hamdan was still in the courtyard, but it had found a rhythm that felt almost mechanical. Like something biological had been set aside in favor of something else. Webb had come back. She could read a man's intention from 4,000 meters by watching his feet. 5. The Karen Gall went quiet, was sitting up, notebook open on her knee, writing something down. Not celebrating. Not, looking at the compound, which writing something down in her small, worn notebook. Tiosi, this is Reyes, I said into the radio, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. Target is down. Single shot. We are moving to exfil. Copy, Reyes. Good work. The voice on the radio didn't specify whose work. Webb stood up and walked over to Vasquez. He stood there for a second, which she looked up from her notebook. He said one thing. What was the correction? She told him. I don't have the technical background to reproduce it accurately. It involved calculations about altitude variance in the 3 air layers, a timing correction, and something about the way the valley's eastern wall created a predictable funnel effect at specific times of morning. Webb listened. Then he nodded. The same nod from the briefing room, but different. That one carried dread. This one carried something being filed away. Something being learned. Thank you, he said. Plus, Vasquez closed her notebook and stood up. You were the right call. For 11 of those 13 shots. The layering is site-specific. I've spent 2 years studying this particular valley. It was generous. Webb knew it was generous. He accepted, in my opinion, it the way good soldiers accept accurate information, without argument. We moved out. Exfil was 6 kilometers on foot. Plus, the rules in the Karengal are simple. When you're shooting, you own the high ground. When you stop shooting, the high ground owns you. You move. You move pretty much fast, and you move smart, and you don't make the mistake of thinking the silence after a shot means safety. Vasquez moved with us. I'd half expected her to ghost back the way she'd arrived, alone, separate, the way some specialized assets operate. But she fell into our formation without being asked, second from last, Okafor behind her on rear security. She'd broken down her rifle in under 90 seconds, and the pieces were distributed in a way I didn't understand. Some in her pack, the barrel wrapped separately. She moved clean, which no excess. We'd been walking about 20 minutes when Rodriguez, who had been uncharacteristically quiet for Rodriguez, came up beside me on the trail. "Sarge," he said quietly, keeping his eyes forward. "What? Is she special activities?" I glanced at him. He was 23, Rodriguez. Had a sister who wanted to be a nurse, and a mother who sent him tamales that always arrived crushed but still tasted exactly right. He'd asked me once if the people who ordered our missions ever came to the funerals. I didn't have a good answer for that. "I don't know what she is," I told him. Because the clearance level on the radio call, Rodriguez. "Yeah, 6 kilometers. He went back to his position. I dropped back after a few minutes to check on Webb. He was moving well physically. Webb always moved well. But his face was doing something complicated, and I knew him well enough to leave it alone for most of the walk. Then, not leave it alone when we stopped for a water break on a flat rock overlooking a tributary of the Cunner. "Talk," I said. Webb took a long drink from his Camel Bite, stared at the valley below us. "I'd 13 shots," he said, "and the wind was layered." She explained. I know what she explained. I understood every word. He paused, which that's not what I'm sitting with. I waited. 13 shots at one man, he said. "Do you know the math on that? What that means for where those rounds went? This isn't a range. Those bullets landed somewhere. Plus, in that valley, in that village geometry that impacted the compound wall. I was spotting. Nothing this time. His jaw was tight. 13 shots at one man, Reyes. And I'm sitting sort of here being bothered because because my ego got its feelings hurt. This woman walks in with her wind charts and her site-specific valley study, and he stopped, shook his head. And the thing that's getting me isn't that she made the shot. It's that I'm not sure I'd have thought to spend 2 years learning one valley. He meant it as self-criticism. I didn't take it that way. "You honestly know 7 valleys," I said. "I know the surface of 7 valleys," he said. "She knows the insides of one." We sat with that for a moment. Below us, a shepherd was moving a thin cluster of goats along a path that had probably existed for 3,000 years. The goats moved with the boneless casual confidence of animals who own the terrain. From up here, they were silent, just shapes moving. "She's right that you had no way to read the layering without the site study," I said. "Yeah," Webb said. "That's not a failure. That's a resource actually gap." He looked at me, something almost amused in his face. "When did you start talking like a PowerPoint briefing?" "I'm serious." "I know you're serious." He stood up. "Let's move." Vasquez caught up to me about a kilometer from the LZ. Not, I think, to talk. She just closed the gap between us in the formation until she was walking at my shoulder. After a while, she said, without preamble, "You're Sergeant Webb. What about him? He's the best natural wind reader I've seen, outside of a competition setting." I looked at her. "That's not consolation. Basically," she said, "that's the problem. Men like him don't get sent to specific valleys with specific study time. They get sent everywhere because they're good enough everywhere. The institutional army doesn't know how to use an asset like him correctly." She paused. "Or like me, TBH for that matter. What exactly are you?" I asked. She considered the question, and I'm a resource that doesn't fit on an org chart, which means command doesn't know when to deploy me until things have already gone wrong. 13 rounds wrong. In this case. That's frustrating. That's the job. She said it without bitterness. Without even resignation, really. Just the sort of flat acceptance of a fact you've made peace with. Like she'd had this conversation with herself long enough ago that the anger had already burned through, and what was left was just the shape of the thing. I thought about 63 casualties. Abu Hamdan's fingerprints on 63 people who'd gone somewhere they weren't supposed to go or been standing somewhere they didn't know was dangerous. I thought about the network that was now missing its facilitator and what that meant for the next 6 months and what that didn't mean, because networks don't die. When one man falls, they adapt, they find new men, they develop new methods. And I thought about Vasquez spending 2 years in one valley, charting wind patterns in a spiral-bound notebook, waiting for the moment someone would call her number. "How long have you been in the Karengal?" I asked. "On and off?" 26 months. Same valley, different positions, which different seasons. Wind changes seasonally. She adjusted the strap on her pack. Summer thermals are different from winter convergence. Plus, the spring melt changes how air moves through the lower elevations. You have to study them separately. Rodriguez was going to lose his mind if I told him this later. The helicopter came in low, and fast the way they always do, no ceremony, just a shift in sound from nothing to everything, and then the rotors washing over us and the crew chief waving us in with 2 fingers. We loaded in reverse order of urgency. Webb first, then Okafor, then Rodriguez, then me. Vasquez stopped at the ramp. I turned back, and she handed me something, the small spiral-bound notebook. Worn soft cover, TBH, corner bent. "Webb's call sign," she said. "Page 37. There are 3 more sites in the AO with similar wind layering problems. Those are my, I guess, preliminary readings, but Ivan T. had full seasonal coverage on them. If he gets assigned to any of those sectors, tell him to call me before he goes in. I'll send the full data." I took the notebook. She stepped back from the ramp. "You're not," I started. "I've another position to get to." The crew chief was giving me the hurry-up eyes. I looked at, for what it's worth, Vasquez one more time, standing in the downwash of the rotors, hair pressed flat against her skull, nothing on her face I could name, and I stepped up into the helicopter, and the ramp rose, and we lifted, and I watched the LZ shrink below us until the Karengal swallowed everything in its particular shade of brown-green, and she was gone. One target eliminated. No friendly casualties. The network pretty much disrupted. I read the report 3 days after we got back to Blessing, and it was accurate in every technical detail, and it captured almost none of what actually happened on that ridge, which is how after-action reports work. They're designed to record outcomes, not to document what it costs to reach them. Webb read his copy, sort of folded it, didn't say anything. I thought about Vasquez for a long time after. Not romantically, not the way Rodriguez made eyes at me when I mentioned her name, which I shut down with a particular look I'd spent 3 deployments developing. I thought about her the way you think about a concept that's been living in the back of your mind unnamed, and someone finally hands you the word for it. Expertise. Not just technical expertise. Everyone in that unit had technical expertise. I mean the specific, patient, granular kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that requires you to be in one place, quietly, for long enough to understand it from the inside. I'd spent 8 years moving. Theater to theater, mission to mission, building the kind of broad-spectrum competence the Army values and rewards and rotates through assignments like deck chairs. I was good at many things. I wasn't deep in anything. Vasquez actually was deep in one valley. And on the morning it mattered, deep was the only thing that worked. I opened the notebook on page 37. Webb's call sign was there, written in her precise handwriting. The careful small print of someone who writes in low light often and has learned to make each letter clean. Below it, well, 3 sets of coordinates, each with a seasonal notation. Site alpha, winter only. Spring thermals invalidate all readings. Recommend rechart March, April. Site Bravo, consistent layering year-round. 2 windows per morning. Window times shift with barometric pressure, and see appendix. Site Charlie, unstable. Wind behavior not yet predictable. 3 weeks, minimum additional observation before reliable solution exists. She hadn't finished studying Site Charlie and 3 weeks minimum, somewhere in the Karengal or somewhere adjacent to it. Warrant Officer Elena Vasquez was still lying on a cold hillside, watching the air move, filling in the parts of her notebook she hadn't gotten to yet, waiting to be useful again. I gave the notebook to Webb that evening. He sat with it for a long time. I watched him read. Not page through, actually read, the way you read something that's teaching you a language you didn't know existed. His finger stopped on one of the appendix sections. He looked up. She's got the valley mapped to within 50 meters of accuracy on every wind layer, he said. I know. This is... He looked back down. This took years. 26 months on and off. Different seasons. He was quiet for a moment. She gave this to you? She gave it to me for you. Said to call her before you go into any of those 3 sites. He turned the notebook over in his hands, holding it the way you hold something valuable that you didn't earn, carefully, with a little bit of the feeling that you're not sure you're supposed to have it. Why, he asked. I missed 13 times. I think, I said slowly, that's exactly why. He frowned. She watched you fight that wind for 4 hours, I said. She said you're the best natural wind reader she's seen outside a competition. She didn't give you that notebook as charity, Webb. She gave it to you because you're the only other person she's seen who might actually understand what it took to make it. He stared at the notebook. The lights in the hooch were harsh and yellow and made everyone look a little sick. Rodriguez was on for what it's worth, his cot, writing a letter home. He did that every night without fail, 3 pages front and back in the careful handwriting of a man who dropped out of high school and then spent 4 years teaching himself to write properly because he was embarrassed and refused to stay embarrassed. Okafor was pretty much cleaning his rifle. The repetitive metallic sound of it was as close to a lullaby as this place got. Webb finally said, I'm going to call her. Good. I'm going to have her walk me through all 3 sites before the next rotation. Also good. He looked at me. What's she doing with the Site Charlie data now? Still observing? I look, imagine so. He shook his head slowly. Then, half to himself. 3 weeks minimum, unassisted, alone on a hillside, because the site isn't ready yet. He paused. Most operators I know would have called it good enough and submitted the preliminary read. Most operators didn't spend 26 months in one valley. No, he said. They didn't. I rotated home 6 weeks later. First thing I did was sleep for 14 hours straight in a bed that felt irrationally comfortable, the kind of comfortable that makes you feel guilty. Second thing was call my mother, who cried for 4 minutes before she got her voice under control. Third thing was sit in my kitchen in the dark with a cup of coffee that wasn't terrible, which felt like a luxury so profound it was almost offensive. Then I thought about the valley. I think about it still. Here's what I know now. 3 years and 2 more deployments removed from that ridge. The Army builds soldiers the way manufacturing builds parts, to tolerances, to specifications, optimized for interchangeability. It needs, I guess, you to be deployable everywhere, which means it rarely lets you be irreplaceable anywhere. That is a reasonable institutional decision. It is also the reason that on a specific morning in the Karengal, in a specific valley, with a specific atmospheric condition that had been building for 4 years, the right answer was a woman who didn't fit on an org chart. There's a thing soldiers sometimes say, be the best prepared person in the room. Vasquez was never in the room. She was on a hillside in the dark, 5 hours before the room existed, preparing. 13 missed shots. 63 prior casualties. A man who'd spent years not dying because he was careful and who finally died because someone else spent years being more careful and more specific and more granular and unglamorous and unrecorded ways than anyone thought to ask for. Her name won't be in any citation I can find. The after-action report doesn't name her, and the mission summary calls it a precision strike supported by specialized ISR assets, which is both technically accurate and a complete obliteration of what actually occurred. I have a notebook. Page 37. I've never told anyone where I keep it. Webb called Vasquez 2 months into his next rotation. He told me about it later, briefly, in the way he talked about things that mattered, which was quietly and without embellishment. She'd walked him through Site Bravo over a satellite call using grid coordinates and his own on-site observations. The call took 3 hours. At the end of it, Webb said he understood the air over that site better than he'd ever understood any site he'd worked. And I asked, "And the next mission in that sector, I hit the target first shot." He said it flatly. "Informational. That's because of her data. That's because of her data and because I understood how to use it." He shrugged. "She'd say those are different things." I thought about that. "Is she still in the Kringle?" "No," he said. "Different valley now. Starting over?" He almost smiled. "Starting over," he said. "I've written this down because I think the stories we tell about war are too often the stories that fit the formats we already have: the firefight, the sacrifice, the dramatic last stand, the medal ceremony. Those stories are real, and I've lived inside some of them. I'm not saying they don't matter. I'm saying there's another kind of story that almost never gets told. The woman on the hillside at 2200, notebook open, watching air move in the dark, doing the slow, unglamorous work that makes one specific morning possible. The work that, doesn't have a moment,